Yesterday I buried my husband. We were together for 63 years. Today I am 81. I woke up at dawn in an empty house where every corner still carried his spirit. In the scent of morning coffee, in the chair by the window where he used to read the newspaper, in the worn blanket I neatly folded on his side of the bed the night before the funeral, as if he might still need it if he felt cold. I thought I could be strong. After so many years together, I had grown used to being there for him, taking care of our children, then our grandchildren, and finally him when illness began to take its toll. My husband Edward and I had been through so much. Poverty, joy, war, even a long period apart when I had to leave town to work 3 jobs just to provide for our children. I always knew we would make it because we were together. Now, together was over. All that was left was me. After the funeral, the house was filled with a silence that even my youngest son, Daniel, couldn't chase away. He stayed with me during those first weeks, sleeping on the couch sometimes, making me oatmeal in the morning just like he used to as a boy. I tried to stay strong for his sake, though inside my heart felt split in two. His wife, Catherine, and their son Jake, my only grandson from my son, visited often, bringing cookies and homemade pies. Jake would sit with me at the kitchen table, tell me stories about school, and sometimes read the newspaper aloud if I was too tired to make out the small print. Daniel and I were always close, understanding each other without words. He knew when I needed a hug, and when I just needed someone to sit quietly by my side. With my daughter, things were different. Lydia, my eldest, had always been a daddy's girl. She and Edward could talk for hours, laugh, and walk through the park together, sharing a special bond. I can't say I was jealous, no, but I did sometimes wish things were as easy between us. We spoke warmly but not often, and I never thought much of it. Lydia's boys, twins, Matt and Lucas, now 16 and 17, were busy with their own lives. Lydia never complained or asked for help, and after Edward's passing, I thought her silence was because of her grief. I understood. I was living in grief myself. The evening after the funeral, Lydia told me she needed to get back home to her boys. "I'll text you, Mom, don't worry," she said, hugging me at the door. Then she left. After that, she never called or wrote. Every night, I'd open my phone, stare at the screen, reread her old messages, look at family photos from before Edward's illness. Sometimes I'd even start typing her a message but erase it, thinking maybe I was being a bother, or maybe she was suffering even more than I was. A month passed. Then another. Daniel returned to his family, but still visited me every couple of days, calling every morning and evening without fail. Catherine, his wife, often brought groceries, helped me tidy up, and Jake sometimes spent the night so I wouldn't feel so alone. Daniel would tell me Lydia was fine, that she was just really busy. I believed him. I didn't want to think something was wrong. But at night, when the house was silent, I wondered, why did it hurt so much? Why didn't my daughter call? She used to rush over at the first sign I wasn't well, bringing soup and medicine. I kept telling myself it was just the pain of loss, that we all grieve in our own way. But as it turned out, everything was very different. It was a quiet, cool morning when I heard a knock at the door. For a moment my heart fluttered with hope. Maybe it was Lydia. Maybe today she would finally come back to me. But when I opened the door, it was my grandsons, Matt and Lucas. They looked so much like their mother at that age, tall, lanky, with unruly brown hair and the same uncertain, thoughtful look in their gray-blue eyes. They came in carrying a grocery bag with cookies and a carton of milk. Matt tried to smile, but I could see the sadness hiding in his eyes. Lucas, the older one, gave me a tight hug. He always was more sensitive, just like his mother. The house suddenly felt warmer, as if Edward himself had returned, just for a few moments, in the laughter and voices of his grandsons. We sat around the kitchen table, the same one where so many family meals had been shared. I poured them each a glass of milk, set out plates for the cookies, and for a little while we talked about everything and nothing. Their school, sports, friends, the weather, my flowers out front. Matt teased his brother, and Lucas rolled his eyes, pretending to be annoyed. I smiled genuinely for the first time in months. But there was a shadow over their visit. I felt it as soon as I noticed the way Lucas kept glancing at Matt, almost as if warning him not to say something. After a while, the conversation slowed. Matt started tapping his fingers on the table, then said, almost too casually, "Grandma, do you ever think about moving?" I raised my eyebrows. "No, dear. This is my home. Why would you ask that?" He looked down, then shrugged. mumbling something I couldn't quite hear. Lucas gave him a sharp look, and for a second it felt like I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see. I tried to brush it off. Maybe they were just worried about me being alone. But a strange sense of unease settled in my chest. We changed the subject, talking instead about their school projects and what their mom was cooking for dinner these days. But I kept watching them closely. They left not long after, both boys giving me long, tight hugs, promising to come back soon. As they walked out the door, I heard Matt whisper, "I just hope Mom figures it out soon." Lucas shushed him, glancing back at me with an apologetic smile. Their visit left me feeling both hopeful and anxious. I sat by the window long after they left, staring at the empty street, thinking about the strange tension in their voices, the words left unsaid. That night I called Lydia again. For the first time since the funeral, she answered. Her voice was thin, almost trembling. "Mom." "Lydia, are you all right?" I asked, my own voice shaking. There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, Mom. I've been going through something. I didn't want to worry you." I heard her sniffle on the other end. My heart squeezed. She sounded like a little girl again. "I know about the boys coming to see you," she said quietly. "They said they enjoyed it." "Lydia, honey, what's going on?" I pressed gently. "You haven't called." I was starting to think. She interrupted me, her voice breaking. "They're taking the house, Mom. The bank. I missed too many payments. I thought I could fix it, but I can't. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't know what to do." I tried to comfort her, telling her that everything would work out, but inside I felt a deep sense of dread. My daughter was in trouble and she hadn't come to me, her own mother, for help. We talked for a long time that night. Lydia confessed that she was terrified of losing her sons, terrified that child services would take them if they lost their home. Her voice trembled as she told me about the sleepless nights, the bills piling up, the hopelessness that seemed to hang over their house. I offered her everything I could. Advice, reassurance, and finally an idea. "Lydia," I said, "why don't we put this house, my house, in your name for now? That way you'll have a stable address for the boys, and when they're grown we'll sort everything out. The important thing is keeping your family together." First she resisted. "But Mom, that's your home. You need it." I told her that a house was just wood and stone, that what mattered was family. I said we'd sort things out later, maybe divide everything between her and Daniel when the time came, but right now she needed a safe place for her sons. I could hear the relief in her voice as she finally agreed. "Oh, Mom. Thank you. Thank you. I love you so much. I promise I'll take care of everything." We planned a family dinner that Sunday. Daniel, his wife Catherine, and their son Jake came over, as did Lydia and her boys. For the first time since Edward's passing, the house was full again. Laughter in the kitchen, voices echoing through the hallways, the delicious chaos of family. We all sat around the table as Lydia explained her situation. Daniel listened quietly, then nodded. "I'll help however I can. I know some people in town who can help with the paperwork. We'll get this done quickly." Within a week all the documents were signed. My house was officially in Lydia's name, with the agreement that when the boys turned 18, we'd figure out the rest as a family. Lydia and her sons moved in with me, and Daniel helped them settle. The house, once so empty and sad, felt alive again. But somewhere deep inside, a small cold worry remained. I couldn't shake the memory of those strange words from my grandsons, or the distant look in Lydia's eyes when she talked about the future. For a few weeks, life in the house settled into a gentle, if bittersweet, rhythm. My daughter and her sons filled the space with new energy. The sound of teenage footsteps up and down the stairs, the jangle of keys, the scent of microwave popcorn in the evenings, the groan of the washing machine laboring under sports uniforms and bedsheets. Lydia kept busy, throwing herself into chores, always with a determined but distracted look. She cooked meals, packed lunches for the boys, tried to fix the old leaky tap in the kitchen herself, just as I had done decades earlier. Sometimes I'd catch her sitting in Edward's old chair, lost in thought, and I'd wonder if she missed him more than she let on. I tried my best to help, though my strength wasn't what it used to be. I folded laundry, watered the flowers, and baked oatmeal cookies that always disappeared before the day was out. The boys, Matt and Lucas, were polite, even affectionate, helping me bring in groceries and sometimes joining me for a game of cards. At night, I'd find their sneakers in a messy pile by the back door, and I would smile despite myself. The house felt alive again, and I let myself hope that we were moving forward, piecing together something like happiness from the shards of grief. Daniel continued to visit, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes just dropping off a pie from Catherine or helping Lydia with paperwork. He was a gentle presence, steady, never interfering, never asking questions that Lydia might not want to answer. Sometimes I wondered if he noticed the tension beneath our new routine, the way Lydia avoided talking about her plans, or the way she always seemed to be watching the clock. A month after Lydia and her sons moved in, I decided to take a short trip to the sanatorium. It was the same place Edward and I used to visit for a little peace and rest, by the lakeside, with tall pines swaying in the wind, the air sharp with the scent of pine needles and distant water. I needed a change of scenery, a chance to gather my thoughts. Lydia encouraged me, saying she'd look after the house, and the boys promised to water my flowers and keep my bed made. I kissed them all goodbye, hugged Daniel tightly, and promised to be back in 2 weeks. The sanatorium was peaceful. The days passed in a gentle blur. Morning walks by the water, quiet meals in the dining hall. Afternoons spent knitting by the big bay window. I met other women my age. Some lonely, some talkative, all carrying stories of love and loss. We shared memories, laughed, even cried together over cups of weak tea. Sometimes, in the evenings, I'd look out over the lake and think of Edward, remembering our long walks together, the comfort of his hand in mine. It was the first real rest I'd had since the funeral. I called home often, though Lydia always sounded rushed on the phone. She'd say, "We're all fine, Mom, just busy." Or, "The boys are out with friends." I tried not to worry. I wanted so much to believe her. When my 2 weeks were up, Daniel picked me up at the bus station. His face was tense, but he smiled as he took my suitcase. "Everything all right at home?" I asked, trying to read his expression. "Of course, Mom. Just let's get you home, okay?" But when we pulled up to the house, something felt wrong. A dusty red pickup was parked in the driveway, one I didn't recognize. The yard was littered with leaves and trash. The windows were dark, and the front porch, once swept clean every morning, was covered in dirt. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. As I stepped inside, I froze. The familiar scent of baking and coffee was gone. Instead, the house smelled of paint and dust. The walls were bare. My family photos had vanished. In the living room, 2 men in work overalls were stripping wallpaper, dumping buckets of old plaster into garbage bags. The dining table was gone, replaced by stacks of paint cans and tools. I turned to one of the workers, my voice trembling. "What's happening here? Where's my family?" He looked up, startled. "Oh, you must be the old owner's mother. The house was sold last week. New folks want the whole place redone before they move in." I felt my knees buckle. Daniel caught me, his face pale. "Mom, stay here. I'll find out what happened." We searched the house, but it was empty. Lydia and the boys were gone. My belongings, what little was left, were shoved into the garage, hastily packed into old cardboard boxes. Edward's chair, my wedding china, photo albums, the blanket I'd folded for him that last night, all stacked in a corner with a note taped on, "For disposal." I sat down on the cold garage floor, staring at the boxes. My hands shook so badly I could barely breathe. Daniel knelt beside me, rage and worry etched across his face. "How could she do this?" he whispered. "Without even telling us." We spent the next few days in a daze, trying to piece together what had happened. Daniel called the realtor who'd helped with the house transfer, but the woman just shrugged. "Your daughter handled everything. She said you were moving out. She had all the documents." The notary confirmed the sale was legal, all paperwork in order. The lawyer said it would be nearly impossible to prove any fraud. Lydia had covered her tracks perfectly. It was then that the pieces began to fall into place. Daniel remembered a conversation he'd had with Lydia at the funeral. She'd asked strange questions about inheritance, about whether I had a will. She'd been worried, perhaps, that Edward's passing would leave her with nothing, afraid that I would leave everything to Daniel and cut her out. I tried to remember every conversation, every look she'd given me in the weeks before she moved in. Was it always part of her plan? Had I really missed the signs? As the truth dawned, grief turned to anger, and then to a deep, aching emptiness. My own daughter had used my love to take everything I had. She'd waited until I was out of the way, then sold the only home I'd ever known. She didn't even say goodbye. Daniel insisted I stay with him and Catherine for a while. He was furious, calling the police, but they wouldn't even file a report. It's a family matter, they said. Nothing illegal here. The lawyer repeated the same thing. You signed the papers, ma'am. There's nothing we can do. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence in Daniel's house. I missed Edward more than ever. I missed the house where I'd raised my children, loved my husband, celebrated every birthday and Christmas. Now it was gone and I didn't even have a place to mourn. Sometimes when I closed my eyes, I could almost hear Lydia's voice, sweet and warm, the way it was when she was little before life made her afraid. But now there was only silence. I tried to tell myself that family was more than bricks and mortar, that love could survive even this. But my heart was shattered, and I didn't know if I would ever trust it to anyone again. Daniel and Catherine's house was warm and filled with little reminders of family life. Children's shoes in the hallway, the smell of bread in the oven, a wall covered in Jake's childhood drawings. But to me it felt like I was living in someone else's life. A guest even though I was family. The first few days after the discovery passed in a haze of shock. Catherine tried to comfort me, setting up a cozy guest room with clean sheets and a vase of fresh flowers. Daniel barely slept, spending hours on the phone with lawyers and realtors, going over every document, every signature. Each time he returned with the same answer. Everything looks legal. Mom, are you sure you wanted to do this? I would show him the handwritten agreement Lydia and I made. But the official papers had no mention of it. The house was hers and she sold it while I was away. There were moments when I wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe Lydia would call, explain everything, tell me where she and the boys had gone, apologize for not saying goodbye. But every day passed without a word. My phone sat silent on the bedside table. No calls, no messages, only memories. Catherine was a comfort, always quietly supportive. She brought me tea at night and sat with me in the mornings, gently guiding the conversation away from the pain when I couldn't hold back the tears. Jake tried to make me laugh with silly stories about school, and sometimes he succeeded, at least for a moment. But nothing could fill the hollow ache left by my daughter's betrayal. Sometimes I found myself wandering the small garden behind Daniel's house, touching the rose bushes and thinking of my own garden, how Edward and I had planted flowers every spring, how we'd watched them bloom together year after year. I'd look at Daniel, stooped over a stubborn weed, and see echoes of his father, his patience, his kindness. He never once suggested I should move to a nursing home, never treated me like a burden. But there were nights when I heard Daniel and Catherine whispering in the kitchen after they thought I'd gone to bed. She can't live like this forever, Danny, Catherine would say, her voice low and worried. What if Lydia never comes back? What if she needs real care? I'd lie awake, feeling the sting of guilt, wondering if maybe it was true. We tried to contact Lydia any way we could. Daniel found her old boss at work, but he hadn't seen her in weeks. He checked with the boys' school, but they had been withdrawn the day I left for the sanatorium. No forwarding address. No messages on social media. Nothing. My heart ached not only for my lost home but for the two grandsons I'd come to love like my own sons. I imagined them somewhere far away, maybe frightened, maybe angry, maybe convinced by their mother that I had turned against them. The thought nearly broke me. One morning as I was folding laundry in Daniel's living room, I heard a knock at the door. For a moment hope flared in my chest. Maybe finally it was Lydia. But when Daniel opened the door, it was only the mailman, handing over a stack of letters. I realized how quickly hope turns to pain, how easily trust is broken. That day, Daniel came home from the city with more bad news. Mom, I talked to another lawyer. He said the only way to challenge the sale is to prove you were coerced or mentally unfit when you signed. Otherwise, Lydia has every right. He tried to hide his frustration, but I saw the pain in his eyes. He was angry at his sister, yes, but also at himself for not seeing the signs, for not protecting me. I tried to reassure him. Daniel, you did everything you could. I never imagined. I never believed my own daughter. My voice broke. Daniel hugged me tightly. We'll get through this, Mom. You're not alone. Yet the truth was I had never felt more alone in my life. Days passed into weeks. I tried to be useful around the house, helping Catherine with meals and laundry, offering to babysit Jake even though he was nearly grown. But I felt like a ghost, moving through someone else's world, missing my own. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd get up and wander to the kitchen, looking for something I couldn't name. A sense of belonging, perhaps, or just a glimpse of the life I'd lost. The neighbors were kind, but I could see the questions in their eyes. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Taylor? Are you staying with Daniel for long?" I'd smile and nod, but inside I was shrinking, becoming smaller with every polite question I couldn't answer. I tried to call Lydia one more time, leaving a long message. "I don't care about the house, Liddy. I just want to know that you and the boys are safe. Please call me." There was no response. One afternoon, Catherine found me sitting on the back steps, staring at the sky. She knelt beside me and took my hand. "You're not alone, Mom. We love you. Please don't give up." I nodded, but my heart was heavy. I wondered if maybe I had outlived my place in this world. If perhaps the best parts of my life were over, and I was just waiting for the end. But Daniel refused to give up. He spoke to the police again, who repeated that there was nothing they could do, that family disputes were outside their jurisdiction. The lawyer suggested mediation, but Lydia never replied to any letters or calls. The pain of betrayal was almost physical, like a tight band around my chest, making it hard to breathe. I slept poorly, haunted by dreams of Lydia as a little girl, running to me for comfort, laughing as Edward chased her through the garden. How could that sweet child become the woman who would take everything from her own mother and disappear? There were good days, of course. Sometimes Jake and I would bake together, and for an hour or two I could forget the pain. Sometimes Daniel would sit beside me, just holding my hand in silence, and I'd remember that I was still loved, still needed. But mostly there was emptiness, a sense that the world had moved on without me, that all I had left were memories. One evening, as the sun set in a wash of orange over the neighborhood rooftops, I stood in the garden and whispered Edward's name, wishing he could tell me what to do, how to forgive, how to move forward. But the wind only rustled the leaves, offering no answers. I went to bed that night feeling more tired than ever, my body aching with the weight of loss. In the darkness, I wondered if I would ever hear from Lydia again, or if she was lost to me forever. Autumn crept steadily into winter, and with it, my hope slowly faded. The leaves outside Daniel's window turned golden and then brown, drifting down to cover the garden I barely recognized. Every day felt heavier, as if the air itself was pressing down on my chest. Catherine and Daniel did everything they could to make me feel at home, but deep inside, I felt that nothing would ever be the same again. I tried to adjust, to be a good guest, to hide my grief and my humiliation. Catherine would make me tea in the mornings and tell me gently, "We're so glad to have you here." Daniel would leave notes on the kitchen table, reminding me to eat breakfast, or come sit with me in the afternoons, reading aloud from the local paper just as Edward once did. I was grateful, but every gesture reminded me that I was no longer the mistress of my own life. I was an old woman without a home, someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the house. I would hear Jake come home late from studying, hear Catherine's soft laughter, hear Daniel pacing in the living room, quietly speaking on the phone as he searched for Lydia. No one ever found her. It was as if she and the boys had vanished into thin air. I worried endlessly about my grandsons. Were they safe? Did they hate me? Had their mother told them I had abandoned them? One cold morning, Catherine found me in the kitchen, staring at a faded photograph of Edward and me from our wedding day. My hands were shaking. "Are you all right, Mom?" she asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Sometimes I feel like a ghost in my own story." Daniel tried to fight for me until the very end. He called every lawyer in town, begged the police to reopen the case, wrote letters to old friends, anyone who might know where Lydia had gone. But there was never a trace. No new address, no message, not even a rumor. Lydia had erased herself from our lives as easily as she had erased me from my home. I knew I was becoming a burden, no matter how hard Daniel and Catherine tried to hide it. The guest room began to feel smaller and smaller, the world closing in. I tried to find new routines, folding laundry, taking short walks in the yard, watching the birds through the window. But the ache of betrayal gnawed at me night and day. The loneliness grew deeper with each passing week. I caught myself talking to Edward's memory, asking him if I had failed, if I had been too soft, too trusting. I wondered what I could have done differently, or if I should have seen Lydia's plan. I tried to forgive, tried to let go, but the wound refused to close. And then one afternoon, as I sat in the living room watching the gray November rain streak down the window, Catherine came running in. Her face was pale with fear. "Daniel! Mom! Come quick!" I didn't understand at first. Then I realized I was on the floor. My arms and legs wouldn't move. I tried to call for help, but my voice was just a whisper. Daniel was suddenly there, lifting me, his face stricken with terror. "Call an ambulance. Mom, hold on." Everything blurred. Sirens, bright lights, voices shouting. I remember Daniel holding my hand, tears streaming down his face. I remember Catherine whispering prayers, squeezing my fingers. Jake stood in the hallway, silent, eyes wide with shock. I drifted in and out of consciousness. The hospital was a blur of white coats and beeping machines. I heard snippets of voices. Heart attack. Old age. So much stress. I tried to speak, to say goodbye, but the words never came. Lying there, I thought of Lydia, my little girl so full of promise, now lost to me forever. I forgave her, even though she'd taken everything. I forgave myself too for trusting too much, for loving blindly, for hoping when there was nothing left to hope for. In my final moments I thought of Edward waiting for me, somewhere beyond the pain and the loneliness. I had loved, I had lost, and now at last I was ready to rest. That night was my last. As darkness settled, I felt a gentle peace. Tomorrow I would not wake up.